Danny Cole was cleaning his tools when the explosion shook the station. The lights flickered twice, and then the emergency sirens began screaming through the corridors of Waypoint 7. He dropped his wrench and ran to the door of his small repair shop, joining dozens of other people rushing toward the lower docking bay. The cargo shuttle had come in too fast. Everyone on the station knew it the moment they saw the damage. The vessel had torn through the docking clamps and crashed into the loading platform, leaving a trail of fire and twisted metal across the bay floor. Emergency crews were already pulling survivors from the wreckage when Danny arrived. He counted 15 people being carried to safety, most of them walking on their own, some being supported by others. They were a species Danny had seen many times on the station. They were tall and thin, with pale blue skin and 4 slender arms. Their large violet eyes made them look gentle and curious, like children seeing the universe for the first time. Danny watched the rescue efforts for an hour before returning to his shop. There was nothing he could do. He was a mechanic, not a medic. He fixed prosthetic limbs and cybernetic implants for workers who got injured in the mining operations. He was good at his job, but he had no business getting involved in emergency medical situations. His assistant was waiting for him when he got back. She was younger than him by 6 years, with short brown hair and the steady hands of someone who had served as a military medic before taking this quieter job. Her face was pale and troubled. She told him about the girl. There had been one passenger the rescue crews almost missed, a child, buried under a collapsed section of the shuttle hull. They had pulled her out alive, but barely. She was 12 years old, traveling with her parents, both of whom died in the crash. The girl had survived, but she had lost 3 of her 4 arms and both of her legs. Danny felt something cold settle in his stomach. He asked what the authorities were doing for her, shook her head slowly, and said nothing. Danny did not understand. He asked again, more firmly this time, explained that the government had already responded to the station commander's request for assistance. They had refused to help. The girl belonged to a family that had fallen out of favor with the ruling council back home. More importantly, culture viewed those who lost their limbs as cursed by the universe. They believed such people carried bad fortune wherever they went. The government wanted nothing to do with her. Danny stood in silence for a long time. Then he walked out of his shop and made his way to the station medical center. Dr. Price was a tired woman in her 50s who had spent 20 years treating injuries on frontier stations. She had seen everything from mining accidents to pirate attacks, and very little surprised her anymore. But when Danny found her outside the intensive care unit, she looked shaken. She told him the girl was stable, but there was nothing more she could do. The body could not regenerate lost limbs. Their own medical technology had no solutions for cases this severe. And no one was coming to help her. Danny asked if he could see her. Dr. Price studied him for a moment, then nodded and led him through the doors. The girl was lying on a bed that was too big for her. Medical tubes connected her small body to machines that beeped and hummed softly. Her remaining arm, the upper left one, lay limp at her side. Bandages covered the places where her other limbs should have been. Her large violet eyes were open, staring at the ceiling without seeing anything. She did not react when Danny and Dr. Price entered the room. Her name was. Dr. Price said it quietly, like she was afraid of disturbing something fragile. Danny moved closer to the bed. He looked at the small blue face, at the eyes that held nothing but emptiness. He thought about what it must feel like to wake up in a strange place, surrounded by alien faces, knowing your parents were dead and your own people had abandoned you. He thought about being 12 years old and having no one in the entire universe who cared whether you lived or died. He asked Dr. Price how long she could stay in the medical center. The doctor said a few weeks at most. After that, the station would have to make other arrangements. The government was already pressuring them to transfer her to an isolation colony, a place where their society sent people they considered defective. Danny asked what would happen to her there. Dr. Price did not answer, but her expression told him everything he needed to know. Danny looked at again. She still had not moved. She probably could not move, not without help. She could not feed herself. She could not clean herself. She could not do anything at all except lie there and wait for whatever terrible fate the universe had planned for her. Something inside Danny changed in that moment. He did not understand it fully. He was not a hero. He was not particularly brave or noble. He was just a mechanic who fixed broken things because that was what he knew how to do. But standing there, looking at this broken child, he felt a certainty he had never experienced before. He told Dr. Price he wanted to help. The doctor looked at him with confusion. She asked what he meant. Danny explained that he built prosthetic limbs for a living. He had spent 15 years learning how human bodies connected to artificial parts. He did not know anything about physiology, but he could learn. He could figure it out. He could build her new arms and new legs and give her back the life that the universe had tried to take from her. Dr. Price warned him that it was impossible. No human had ever built prosthetics for her. Their nervous systems were completely different from human biology. The technology did not exist. The knowledge did not exist. Danny would be starting from nothing. Danny nodded slowly. He understood. He was going to do it anyway. He returned to his shop that night and sat at his workbench for hours. He pulled up every file he could find about anatomy and found almost nothing useful. Their species kept their medical knowledge closely guarded. The information he needed simply was not available through normal channels. He would need help from someone on the inside. Danny began sketching rough designs on his tablet. 5 limbs, 3 arms and 2 legs. Each one would need to connect to nerve clusters, respond to brain signals, and move the way limbs were supposed to move. He had no idea how to accomplish any of it, but for the first time in years, he felt like his work actually mattered. Somewhere in the medical center, a little girl was waiting, and Danny Cole was not going to let her down. Danny spent the next 3 days searching for information and finding nothing. Human databases contained basic facts about culture and history, but almost no medical data. Their species protected such knowledge carefully, sharing it only with approved partners and allies. Humans were neither. The two civilizations had been in contact for only 40 years, and their relationship remained distant and formal. On the 4th day, Danny remembered. Was a trader who passed through Waypoint 7 every few months. 2 years ago, his ship had suffered a critical malfunction that left him stranded at the station for weeks. The station engineers had refused to work on alien technology they did not understand, but Danny had offered to help. He had spent 18 hours studying the unfamiliar systems before finally identifying the problem. Had never forgotten that kindness. Danny found him in the trading district, negotiating the sale of rare minerals from the outer colonies. When Danny explained what he needed, went very still. His 4 arms folded against his chest in a gesture Danny had learned meant deep discomfort. Warned him that helping a cursed one would bring trouble. The government took such matters seriously. Anyone who aided the condemned was considered contaminated by the same misfortune. Danny said he did not care about superstitions. He cared about a 12-year-old girl who had no one else to fight for her. Studied Danny with his large violet eyes for a long moment. Then he reached into his robe and pulled out a small data chip. He pressed it into Danny's hand and told him it contained everything he needed to know about neural biology. He warned Danny never to reveal where he got it. Then he walked away without looking back. Danny returned to his shop and loaded the data chip into his system. The information that appeared on his screen was unlike anything he had ever seen. Nervous systems operated on principles completely foreign to human medicine. Their nerves transmitted signals using electrical pulses at frequencies far outside the range human prosthetics were designed to handle. The interface technology Danny had spent his career mastering would not work at all. He called and showed her what he had found. She had more medical training than he did, and he needed her help to understand what he was looking at. Together, they worked through the night, mapping the differences between human and biology. By morning, had identified a possible solution. The nervous system responded to specific frequency patterns that human technology could theoretically replicate. The problem was that no one had ever tried it before. They would be building something entirely new, with no guarantee it would work. Danny told her to start designing the interface. He would handle the mechanical components. Over the following week, Danny visited every day. At first, she would not look at him. She lay in her bed with her eyes fixed on the ceiling, refusing to acknowledge his presence. He understood. She had already been abandoned by everyone she had ever known. Why should she trust some strange human who claimed he wanted to help her? Danny did not push. He simply sat beside her bed and talked. He told her about his life on Earth, about the oceans and forests and mountains he had left behind when he came to work in space. He described the first time he saw a nebula through a viewport, the way the colors had seemed to glow from within like something alive. He told her about his mother, who had taught him to fix things with his hands, and his father, who had always said that the measure of a person was how they treated those who could do nothing for them. On the fifth day spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper, rough from days of silence. She asked Danny why he was doing this. He thought about the question carefully before answering. He told her that he did not really know. He just knew that leaving her alone felt wrong. He knew that he had the skills to help her, and that not using them would haunt him for the rest of his life. Turned her head and looked at him for the first time. Her violet eyes were wet with tears she had been holding back. She asked if he would really build her new arms and legs. Danny promised her that he would. That night finished the first prototype of the neural interface. Danny tested it against the specifications from data and found that the frequency alignment was close but not perfect. They adjusted the design and tested again. Closer, again, even closer. By the end of the week, they had something that might actually work. Danny began building the first prosthetic arm. He worked slowly and carefully, knowing that every component had to be perfect. The arm needed to be light enough for a child to carry but strong enough to function normally. It needed joints that moved smoothly in all the directions an arm was supposed to bend. Most importantly, it needed to connect to his nervous system without causing pain or damage. While Danny built, trouble arrived at the station. Ambassador came from there with official authority and clear instructions. He was tall even for his species, with cold eyes and a manner that suggested he considered everyone around him beneath his notice. He met with Station Commander Laura Blake and demanded that be released into custody immediately. The government had decided to transfer her to an isolation colony where she would be cared for among others of her kind. Commander Blake was a practical woman who understood politics and power. She knew she could not refuse a formal diplomatic request without serious consequences, but she also knew what isolation colonies really were. She had heard the stories, so she told Ambassador that the girl was still receiving medical treatment and could not be moved safely. The transfer would have to wait. Accepted the delay but made his position clear. He would return in 3 weeks. If the girl was not ready by then, he would take her anyway. Commander Blake called Danny to her office that evening and told him what had happened. He had 3 weeks to complete 5 prosthetic limbs, test them, attach them to a patient whose biology he barely understood, and somehow make them work well enough that the girl could survive on her own. If he failed, would be sent to a place where she would spend the rest of her life being treated as something less than a person. Danny thanked the commander for the warning and returned to his shop. He looked at the single half-finished arm on his workbench. 3 weeks. It was not enough time. He knew it was not enough time, but he also knew that somewhere in the medical center, a little girl was counting on him. He picked up his tools and got back to work. The materials Danny needed were expensive. The specialized alloys for the skeletal frames, the synthetic muscle fibers, the neural interface components, the power cells that would keep everything running for years without replacement. When he added up the costs, The number that appeared on his screen made him feel sick. It was more than he earned in 5 years. It was more money than he had ever seen in one place in his entire life. He sold his ship first. It was a small transport vessel he had bought years ago with dreams of eventually leaving station life behind. Those dreams did not matter anymore. He found a buyer within 2 days and transferred the credits directly to his materials account. It was not enough. He sold his savings next. Everything he had put aside for retirement, for emergencies, for the future he had imagined for himself. Gone in a single transaction. Still not enough. Found out what he was doing and confronted him in the shop late one night. She demanded to know why he had not asked for her help. Before Danny could answer, she transferred half of her own savings into his account. He tried to refuse. She told him to stop being stupid and get back to work. Word began to spread through the station. People talked about the human mechanic who was trying to build limbs for the alien girl. Most of them thought he was crazy. Some of them thought he was a fool wasting resources on a lost cause. But a few of them thought he was doing something important. Donations started arriving. Small amounts at first, just a few credits here and there from workers who could barely afford to share. Then larger contributions came from merchants and engineers who had heard the story and wanted to help. A mining crew pooled their weekly bonuses and sent them to Danny with a note that said simply, "For the kid." A human engineer named showed up at the shop one morning and offered his services. He was an expert in structural design, the kind of person who understood how to make things strong and light at the same time. Danny accepted his help gratefully. Dr. Price visited every day to check on the project's progress and provide updated medical data on its condition. The girl was stable but growing weaker. Her body was struggling without the limbs it was designed to have. They needed to move faster. 2 weeks into the project, Ambassador requested a meeting with Danny. The request was phrased politely, but Danny understood it was not optional. He met the ambassador in one of the station's formal reception rooms, a cold space with gray walls and harsh lighting. Studied Danny with open contempt. He asked why a human was wasting his time and resources on a creature the universe had clearly marked for suffering. He explained that society had evolved beyond such foolish sentiment. The weak existed to be culled. The broken existed to be discarded. By helping, Danny was interfering with the natural order of things. Danny listened quietly until the ambassador finished speaking. Then he said something he had been thinking about for days. He told that where he came from, the measure of a civilization was not how it treated the strong, but how it treated the vulnerable. He said that humans had spent thousands of years learning that lesson the hard way, through wars and atrocities and terrible mistakes. But they had learned. And they had decided that no one, not even the most broken and abandoned person in the universe, was beyond saving. Asked what gave humans the right to impose their values on other species, Danny replied that he was not imposing anything on anyone. He was simply offering help to someone who needed it. If they found that offensive, that was their problem, not his. The ambassador left without another word. That night, disaster struck. Danny was testing the neural interface on the first completed arm when something went wrong. The frequency alignment shifted unexpectedly, and the entire system overloaded. The arm's delicate circuitry burned out in seconds, filling the shop with smoke and the smell of melted components. 2 weeks of work destroyed in a single moment. Danny sat in the wreckage for hours. He stared at the ruined arm and felt everything he had been holding inside come crashing down. The deadline was impossible. The task was impossible. He had been fooling himself from the beginning, thinking he could somehow build technology that had never existed before and save a girl that an entire civilization had given up on. Found him at 3 in the morning, still sitting in the same spot. She did not say anything at first. She just sat down beside him and waited. Finally, Danny spoke. He told her he could not do it. He had tried everything and it was not enough. The interface would not stabilize, the frequencies would not align, and even if he rebuilt the arm from scratch, he would just fail again. He was not smart enough or skilled enough or good enough to pull this off. Asked him what would do if he quit. Danny did not answer. He already knew. If he quit, the girl would be sent to the isolation colony. She would spend the rest of her short life alone and forgotten, surrounded by others her society considered worthless. She would never walk again. She would never hold anything in her hands again. She would never have a chance to become anything other than a victim. Told him to go to bed. They would start again in the morning. Danny was about to argue when his communicator buzzed. It was a message sent from the medical center system. She had learned how to use the station's basic communication tools with her one remaining hand. The message contained a single word, written carefully in the human language she had been studying. Please. Danny read the word 3 times. Then he stood up and walked to his workbench. He picked up a fresh set of components and began building again, watched him for a moment, then smiled and joined him. They worked through the night together, not speaking, just building. When the sun came through the station's viewport windows, Danny held a new neural interface in his hands. It was better than the first one, stronger, more stable. Maybe not impossible after all. Danny returned to the problem with fresh eyes. The previous interface had failed because he had been trying to force human technology to work with biology. He needed a different approach. He needed to understand how actually experience their own bodies. He visited in the medical center and asked her questions no one had thought to ask before. He wanted to know what her arms and legs had felt like before the accident. How had she controlled them? How had she learned to move when she was young? Was confused by the questions at first. She had never thought about such things. Moving had always been natural, like breathing or blinking. But Danny was patient. He sat with her for hours, gently guiding her through memories she had forgotten she possessed. Eventually something emerged. Remembered learning to control her limbs as a small child. Her mother had taught her through music. Children learn to move by following rhythms, matching their motions to patterns of sound that their nervous systems could interpret and repeat. The music created pathways in their minds that their bodies learned to follow. Danny felt something click into place. The interface had failed because it was sending steady, constant signals, but nerves did not respond to constant signals. They responded to patterns. They needed rhythm. He rushed back to his shop and began redesigning the interface from scratch. Instead of a continuous connection, the new design would pulse signals in rhythmic sequences that matched the patterns had described. It was elegant and strange, and completely unlike anything human prosthetic technology had ever attempted. And worked beside him around the clock. They barely slept. They barely ate. The deadline was 10 days away and they had 5 limbs to build. The first arm came together faster than Danny expected. The new interface integrated smoothly with the mechanical components. Testing showed stable frequency alignment across all parameters. It was actually going to work. They built the second arm in 3 days, then the third. The legs were more complicated, requiring larger power systems and more complex joint mechanisms, but Danny had found his rhythm now. He understood what he was building and why it worked. The pieces fell into place like they had been waiting for him to figure out the puzzle. On day 18, 5 prosthetic limbs sat on Danny's workbench. 3 arms and 2 legs, each one customized for a 12-year-old girl. The arms had delicate fingers designed for the precise craftwork culture valued. The legs were built for grace and balance, capable of the flowing movements that dancing required. They were not just functional replacements. They were gifts. Dr. Price examined the limbs and declared them ready for attachment. The surgery would take 6 hours. The recovery period was unknown because no one had ever done this before. Danny visited one last time before the operation. She was lying in her bed, her violet eyes watching him with a mixture of hope and fear. He sat beside her and took her remaining hand in his. He told her what was going to happen. He explained that Dr. Price would put her to sleep and then attach the new limbs to her body. When she woke up, she would have arms and legs again. They might feel strange at first. They might not work perfectly right away. But they would be hers, and with practice she would learn to use them just like her original limbs. Asked if it would hurt, Danny told her honestly that he did not know, but he promised that he would be there when she woke up. He promised that no matter what happened, she would never be alone again. The surgery began at dawn the next day. Danny watched from the observation room above the operating theater, his hands gripping the railing so tightly his knuckles turned white. Stood beside him, equally tense. Paced back and forth behind them, unable to stay still. Dr. Price worked with careful precision, attaching each limb to the connection points they had prepared on its body. The neural interfaces activated one by one, sending their rhythmic pulses into her nervous system. Her vital signs spiked with each connection, then gradually stabilized. The machines monitoring her brain activity showed patterns that Dr. Price had never seen before, strange rhythms that matched the pulsing of the interfaces. 6 hours passed, then 7, then 8. Finally, Dr. Price stepped back from the table and looked up at the observation window. She nodded once. Danny ran down to the operating theater so fast he nearly fell twice. He burst through the doors just as was beginning to wake up. Her violet eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then slowly clearing. She looked down at her body. 3 arms lay at her sides where before there had been only one. 2 legs stretched out beneath the blanket covering her lower body. They were different from her original limbs, made of materials that gleamed softly in the medical center's light, but they were there. They were real. Lifted her right hand. The fingers moved, slowly at first, then with increasing confidence. She made a fist. She spread her fingers wide. She touched her face with a hand she had thought she would never have again. Then she began to cry. Danny moved to her bedside and knelt down so their faces were level. He did not speak. He just stayed there, letting her process what had happened, letting her feel whatever she needed to feel. After a long time, looked at him through her tears. She whispered 2 words in his language, the words she had been practicing for days. "Thank you." Danny smiled and told her she was welcome. The celebration was short-lived. Commander Blake contacted Danny within the hour. Ambassador had arrived at the station with security forces. He was demanding immediate access to the medical center. The deadline had passed. He was coming to take away. Ambassador arrived at the medical center with 6 armed guards at his back. His cold eyes swept across the humans gathered in the corridor outside its room. Commander Blake stood at the front, her expression calm but firm. Danny flanked the door. Dr. Price waited just behind them, her arms crossed over her chest, and a dozen other station workers had gathered as well, forming a wall of bodies between the ambassador and the girl he had come to claim. Demanded that they step aside. He reminded them that the government had legal authority over all citizens of their species, regardless of where they were located. The girl belonged to them. By keeping her, the humans were committing an act of diplomatic aggression that could have serious consequences. Commander Blake acknowledged his position. She said that she understood the legal situation and respected the sovereignty of the government. But she also noted that had just major surgery and was not medically fit to travel. Moving her now could endanger her life. Dismissed her concerns. He said they had their own medical facilities and did not need human interference. He gestured to his guards to advance. Danny stepped forward. He looked directly at the ambassador and asked for permission to speak. Paused, curious despite himself. He granted the request with a wave of his hand. Danny knew that whatever he said in the next few minutes would be recorded by the ambassador's devices. He knew that his words would be transmitted back to where government officials and ordinary citizens alike would eventually see them. So he spoke carefully, choosing every word with purpose. He began by describing what had happened too. A shuttle crash that killed her parents, injuries that took her limbs, abandonment by her own government, by her own people, by everyone who should have protected her. He described the days she spent alone in the medical center, unable to move, unable to care for herself, waiting to be shipped off to a place where she would be forgotten forever. Then he described what the humans had done. He talked about the donations from workers who earned barely enough to survive. He talked about volunteering his expertise without asking for anything in return. He talked about giving away half her savings for a stranger. He talked about Dr. Price working double shifts to keep a child alive who was not even her species. He pulled out his tablet and showed images of the prosthetic limbs he had built. He explained how they worked, how they connected to neurobiology in ways no technology had ever accomplished before. He showed video of moving her new fingers, of tears running down her face as she realized she was whole again. Then he asked his question. He asked the ambassador, and through him the entire civilization, whether this was really what they wanted to be. A people who threw away their children because of misfortune. A culture that saw suffering as a sign of unworthiness rather than a call for compassion. A species that had traveled among the stars but had never learned the simple lesson that every human child understood, that the people who need help the most are the ones who deserve it the most. Ambassador listened in silence. When Danny finished, the ambassador's face was unreadable. He turned to his guards and began to issue an order. Before he could speak, his communicator chimed urgently. He answered it with obvious irritation, then went very still as he listened to the message. His expression shifted from annoyance to confusion to something that might have been shock. Danny did not know it yet but had been busy. The trader had recorded Danny's visits to the medical center, his conversations with, his endless hours of work in the shop. He had compiled everything into a documentary and shared it across social networks, where it had spread faster than anyone could have predicted. Young, many of whom had grown up questioning the old ways, had embraced the story of the human who saved the cursed girl. Public opinion was shifting. Protests were forming. The government was receiving messages from citizens demanding to know why they had abandoned a child when an alien had been willing to sacrifice everything to help her. Ambassador ended the call and stood in silence for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away without another word. His guards followed, leaving the corridor empty except for the humans who had refused to move. Commander Blake let out a breath she had been holding for what felt like hours. She told Danny that the government had reversed its decision, was being granted refugee status. She could stay on the station as long as she wanted. Danny felt his legs go weak, caught his arm and helped him stay upright. Around them, the gathered workers began to cheer. 3 months later, Danny stood in the doorway of his shop and watched take her first independent steps. She had spent weeks in rehabilitation, learning to use her new limbs, building strength and coordination that her body had never needed before. Dr. Price had supervised every session, adjusting the prosthetics and monitoring her progress with fierce attention. Now was walking across the rehabilitation room without help. Her movements were still a little uncertain, still finding their rhythm, but she was walking. She was standing on her own 2 legs and moving forward under her own power. She walked all the way to Danny and wrapped 3 arms around him in an embrace. Her violet eyes were bright with joy. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Danny had officially adopted her through station protocols 2 weeks earlier. The paperwork had been complicated by the fact that cross-species adoption had never been attempted before, but Commander Blake had made it happen, had a home now. She had a family. She had a future. The shop had a new sign above the door. Danny had put it up that morning. It read, "Cole and Daughter Prosthetics." A family arrived at the station that afternoon. They had traveled for weeks from the outer colonies, following rumors and stories and desperate hope. Their son had lost an arm in an industrial accident. They had heard about a human who could fix such things. They had come to find him. Danny brought them into the shop and introduced them to his assistant, smiled at the frightened boy and showed him her own prosthetic arms. She explained how they worked. She demonstrated how she could move her fingers and grip objects and do everything she had done before the accident. The boy's fear began to fade. His parents began to cry. Danny watched his daughter for a moment, pride swelling in his chest. Then he turned to the family and asked them to tell him about their son's injury. He pulled out his tablet and began taking notes. There was work to be done. Outside the shop window, the stars shone cold and distant against the void of space. Somewhere out there, on 100 different worlds, people were suffering and alone, abandoned by societies that had decided they were not worth saving. Danny could not help all of them, but he could help this one family, and then the next, and then the one after that. It was not much, but it was enough to start.